Hi everyone, and welcome again to our Warhammer Fantasy Battle 4th edition tutorial on how to play. After setting up the game and of course setting up your army, when it's finally the first player's turn, the first step of the game is the movement phase. And inside the movement phase, it's broken down into 5 component parts, and there's as follows. There's declare charges, and then you rally fleeing troops, then you go into compulsory moves, then you move your chargers, and then you do any remaining moves that are necessary. So we'll go straight into the first step, declare charges. When in this scenario, there is a unit of some undead skeletons, and they're facing against some 10 wood elf archers. We'll say that it's the undead player's turn, and they would, at this point, they would like to charge into the wood elf archers. So they will declare a charge, and a good way to declare a charge is to just use a token. It depends how much stuff you have on the battlefield, how many units you have. It's generally easy to remember. The more you play, the easier it will be to remember in general. So in this case, the skeletons are going to attempt to charge into the wood elf archers, and so you declare all the charges for all of the troops that you want to charge on the battlefield. And as soon as you're done with that, that step or that phase has been completed. And now we go into the rally fleeing troops phase. During the turn or the turn before, there may be troops on the battlefield that are fleeing, and they may be running away due to panic, due to losing a combat, or maybe they're subject to some kind of psychological effect such as terror or fear. If they're running away, every troop that is fleeing, you will roll 2d6 against their leadership. Again, the higher the leadership, the value, the better. So, and you want to go equal to or under. So if, for example, the skeletons, I'm not sure what their leadership is, let's say it's 7, I'd roll 2d6. If I get 7 or less, I'm able to rally them. When you rally the troops, you're able to turn them to face any direction. And I don't think you can, they remain where they are. You can adopt a new fighting formation facing towards the enemy. So it's pretty vague there. I would say that the troop can reform into as many columns and ranks as you wish. So I'm pretty sure that's the way the rules go. The next stage goes to compulsory movement. Compulsory movement often happens when there's a unit such as a unit of trolls. Trolls may be subject to stupidity. So if they fail their stupidity test, they may move in a manner that's not that's maybe not the best for your army. They may get in the way of other troops, for example. The compulsory moves happen next, and then after that we go straight into move chargers. All right, we're finally into the move chargers phase, and during this phase, any charges that you declared, you're going to now attempt to get into hand-to-hand combat. Now, before you move any charging units, the unit that's being charged gets to declare a reaction, and there's 3 reactions that are possible. There's stand and shoot, there's hold, and there's flee. So in this case, if these were not wood elf archers, let's say they just had spears or hand weapons, then they would only be able to do a hold reaction or a flee reaction. A hold reaction basically means they stay where they are and they wait for the charge to come in, and a flee reaction means that they actually turn and they're going to run. They're going to run away. They'll run away 2d6 or 2d6 or 3d6 inches, depending on the movement value of the troops. So in this case, if these wood elf archers were to move or to flee, they would roll 2d6. Anything up to 6 inches is a 2d6 roll, and anything that's more than 6 inches is a 3d6 roll. So horses and stuff like that move a little bit further when they flee. When you flee, the first thing that you do is, it's just easy to mark your unit. You turn them directly around, And because you may have a base that doesn't quite match up, so you want the previous back end of the base to kind of match, and then they're gonna run, and they'll flee directly away from the enemy that's charging them. Now, in this case, however, because they have bows, they will probably want to stand and shoot. In order to stand and shoot, you must be within the distance of your bows, and you always shoot at the farthest range possible. So in this case, I think bows are 24. We're not dealing with a 12-inch range here. But let's say you had a really fast cavalry unit way back here. If they were coming in hard, and let's say they had a charge range of 18 inches, for example. They would fire they would fire immediately. So they don't wait till it gets to close range or anything. They fire at the furthest possible distance possible. So hopefully that makes sense. So in this case, the other restriction on shooting is that you can only shoot if the charging unit is over their regular distance of movement. So I'll try to explain this a little bit better with a scenario. The skeleton have hand weapons and shields, and their movement rate is 4 inches. And so if they're 4 inches or less away from the wood elf archers, then the archers cannot shoot. But if they're between 4 and 8 inches away, then they're able to shoot. When you declare charges, you have to be reasonably confident that your charge will succeed. This is maybe a criticism of the 4th, 5th edition rule set. In theory, you could charge with everything. The only penalty for failing your charge is that you move a regular move, and you probably would do that normal. I guess there's other penalties in that you are not able to turn and do other maneuvers during movement. But it's always, the game's best played in the spirit of the game, which means that when you declare charges, you don't declare charges unless you're reasonably confident of getting there. So in this case, we're now going to measure the range. And if you could see, it's a little bit over 5 inches. So it's more than 4 inches, which means that they can shoot. The archers, before you move anybody, the archers are now going to do their shoot, and let's just assume they could use the first rank. So in this case, they would have 3 6 shots. And the casualties would be taken and eliminated. That may cause a panic test on the charging unit. If it does, they have to do the panic test immediately. And if they fail it, they're going to flee and they're not going to end up charging. So in this case, we would do that. Let's say a skeleton gets removed, and then they're going to come straight in. Now, when you charge, you can also do one wheel. Now, a wheel is kind of a little bit tricky, and it confuses a lot of people. And I'll try to do it this way as best as I can here. Let's move these things around. If you are to wheel, for example, let's say I want to do a 2-inch wheel with this unit, and let's say I want to pivot it so that it swings this way here. If I do, always take your tape measure, and just from the start, just go from here to here, and just go like that. Yeah, you know what? I'll just use my finger. So I'm going to go like this, and then I'm going to hold this. This is the kind of the pivot point. I'm going to go like this, and that is a 2-inch wheel. And now if I wanted to wheel the other way, like, of course, let's say I want to do a 3-inch wheel the other way, I'm going to just kind of measure out the 3 inches. I'm going to pivot this end and swing this over until the line is kind of equal there, and that's a 3-inch wheel. So that's how you do a wheel. Now, when you also declare your charges, important things are the flank of the enemy unit. So in this case, if I take this, it's to determine the flank, it's usually pretty easy. If it's a square base, you can just cut through like this and like this. But it's even easier if you make just a little template, something like this, and it makes it really easy. So I can tell from this way that going here to going here, anything that's where the center of the front of the unit that's charging in is between these two angles, they'll come into the front of the unit. Now, if this unit's like this, however, I go like this, and as you can see, that the angle here of the enemy unit being charged is at a it's coming in. This would be a flank charge here, because the center of the unit lies within this radius. So again, we'll turn it like this. If this is the case, it's going to be a front charge, because this goes to here. Most of the unit, or the center of the unit, is in the front zone. So it's whichever zone that the unit started with. So, for example, if it's like this, you would come in, and then after you touch the enemy unit, you align. It's usually the charging unit that aligns to the enemy unit. Okay, and that's how you move your chargers. After moving all the chargers, you go into other remaining moves. Okay, when we speak about remaining moves, we should talk about movement in general. All troops have an M value on their stat line, and that refers to movement. That's the base movement of the troops. So in this example, the Wood Elves have a base movement of 5, and the Skeletons have a base movement of 4. Now, if they have shield or light armor or heavy armor alone, or shield and light armor, there's no movement penalty. However, if they have shield and a heavy armor, there's -1 inch movement penalty. And if they're cavalry with barding, then it's in a further -1. And the rulebook gives a pretty clear example on page 20. And again, this is the 4th edition rulebook. And it says a man with no armor can move 4 inches. With a shield and wearing heavy armor, he suffers a penalty of -1 and only has a base movement of 3 inches. Now, when you charge, it's up to double your movement. And so therefore, if you had heavy armor and a shield and you were a man, you would only be able to charge up to 6 inches instead of the normal 8 inches, or 4 times 2. Now, horse and riders can normally move 8 inches, but if you had a knight and it had heavy armor and a shield, that would reduce it by 1, and if the horse was wearing barding, that would reduce it by a further 1. So it would be, instead of 8 inches, there would be a 6-inch movement. Now, in the rulebook, in the army books, it generally, you have to be careful. If I recall correctly, some of the books kind of were a little bit confusing on that respect, and I think the Empire book, for example, I think everything had a movement of maybe 9 or 8 for knights, and they came standard with heavy armor and barding, and there was really no penalty. So you had to kind of make sure. So just remember, a horse is always 8. Okay, next is terrain. Terrain makes movement more difficult. When you're playing Warhammer Fantasy Battle, it's often a good idea, especially if it's a forest or something, is to kind of outline the boundary of the area, and you can do that either using the actual terrain piece, or if you're not, if you're just starting out, maybe it's a piece of cardboard. But if it's a forest, it's always good to mark it out, with maybe a piece of felt, and that defines the boundaries of the forest, and then it makes it very clear on what kind of terrain you're in. If you're in open terrain, there's no penalty to movement, but if you get into other terrain, which is difficult terrain, there is penalties to movement, and we'll go into that next. All right, to continue with movement, we're going to go into terrain. Now, open terrain is usually clear ground that doesn't impede movement at all, and an example of open terrain is usually most hills. Most hills, unless you make, for example, with this scenario here, you could potentially say that, this is some kind of difficult terrain to traverse it, but I would think most groups would just say this is kind of a hilly area, it doesn't impede movement. So therefore, the movement of these troops, the Wood Elves and the Skeletons, would not be impeded by this hill at all. Now, this type of terrain piece is a little bit different. It'd be more difficult to stand most units on this terrain piece. There's a likelihood of them falling over, and I would think most groups would probably call this impassable terrain. Impassable terrain is that terrain that you are you're just not able to move on to it all. So in this case, you would have to perform a wheel and then maybe do your movement. Or turn, maybe even turn. In this case here, this wood elf troop, because they cannot do a wheel without clearing the terrain, they would have to probably do a turn. In this edition of the game, you're not really allowed to back up. So this would be an example of impassable terrain. In this example here, we have an example of of a forest, and this is maybe how an older school battlefield or the terrain might be set up. Having the piece of felt underneath the trees, which is a difficult terrain. Sorry for the noises in the background. Having the trees in the background makes it really easy to move away your kind of woods, and you still know where the boundaries of the terrain are. And it makes it very easy for troops to kind of go through and traverse the terrain. So often a woods is woods, debris, wreckage, fords, shallow water, marshes, soft sand, stairs. That's all known as difficult terrain. And difficult terrain move at half movement rate. So for example, let's say they go like this here and the skeletons want to traverse through it. It would be approximately maybe an inch or maybe 2 inches to hit it. So 2 inches of their movement would be used. And now it's going to be half of their new movement rate. So they have a 4-inch move. They moved 2 inches already, which leaves 2 inches left. So they could go 1 inch through the woods. So it's pretty slow going once you hit. And of course, you measure if the front of the unit is touching the terrain, then it's considered the whole unit gets slowed down because of the terrain. So it's very difficult traversing through many terrain pieces. It's important to note that you cannot march through difficult terrain or very difficult terrain. So so unfortunately, it's often best to go around unless you have some sort of ability that lets you traverse through the woods cleanly. In this scenario, we have a river, and in this river you could choose to make it a shallow river or a deep river. If you choose to make it a deep river, it would be classed as very difficult terrain, and for your movement actually slows down to a quarter move. So for example, if they were right at the edge of the terrain, normally the unit can move 4 inches, a quarter of that is 1. So going through this terrain would let them only go through 1 inch. These types of things slow down. You probably want to put a bridge in place. It's very slow going through a river, and that's also why the setup rules state that a river should only take up a certain percentage of the battlefield. There should be ways across it. Otherwise, troops that have heavy artillery or war machines or lots of shooting, it may be almost impossible for the other side to get through, and it doesn't often create for a dynamic game. Alright, next we're going to move into obstacles. Basically the rules state that to cross an obstacle you have to surrender half of its move. So in this case the skeletons have a 4-inch move. In order to get to the obstacle, they would have to move 2 inches, and then they'd have to surrender the 2 inches. Because they can't get at least the front rank across, they're not allowed to move any further this turn. However, if they started the move touching the obstacle, they would surrender 2 inches, and now they'd move 2 inches, 2 inches past the obstacle. Now, the rules state that the penalty continues to apply, so you would, for each new movement phase, you would take off 2 inches. In theory, I don't think we've ever done that. The obstacles are difficult to cross, we get it. It slows the troops down, it already has. In this case, we would simply just move, in most of the games I play, we just move the troops their full distance on their next move, because they've already paid the penalty once. But that's technically not what the rules state. They state that as long as you've got troops on both sides of the obstacle, you'll continue to suffer the penalty. If you follow the letter of the rules, they would only be able to go another 2 inches next turn. And then next turn they would go another inch to clear the obstacle and then be able to move normal after that. So it would be lose 2 inches, move 1 inch, and then move another inch in that scenario. It is also important to note that obstacles in terrain stack. In general, you probably don't want to do that during setup. There may be a scenario that has, an obstacle inside the forest. It reduces the movement. They're kind of cumulative. So, for example, if a troop moving at half rate or 2 across, so let's say these guys were in the middle of a forest and they encountered the obstacle. Well, the forest would already half their rate. They'd be at 2 inches to cross the obstacle. It'd be half of their remaining moves, so another inch to cross it. So it gets a little bit complicated, and those scenarios are probably best to be avoided if at all possible. Just makes the game a little bit cleaner. The goal of these games isn't to be bogged down in minutiae. It's to be able to play it and make a fluid and an enjoyable game. The next thing I'd like to explore is maneuvering, and we've already gone through the wheel maneuver, but there is another maneuver that's possible, and that's called a turn. A unit can actually turn only once during its move, and to turn a unit of the unit remains where it is, but the facing of the models will either be changed 90 degrees or 180 degrees. To make a turn, you have to surrender a quarter of your move. So a unit of 4. So if these skeletons want to make a turn, they could turn 90 degrees or 180, and that'd be surrendering a quarter of their move. So in this case, a quarter of 4 would be 1 inch of surrendered movement. If you turn it 180, it's pretty simple. You would just, this movement tray has a little bit of space here, so I would go like this. Actually, the tray is itself, so I would go like this. And just go like that. That's a 180 turn. If you're doing a 90 degree turn, however, the models would just turn, and it's often probably just as fast just to turn the front rank. Usually you know where the models in the front rank are based on how they're turning. You could do the sides maybe as well. And you'd want to put any champion or musician or a other leaders kind of in the right spot in the front rank. So that would be an example of the 90 degree turn, and then they'd have 3 inches of movement remaining here. Alright, the next thing that you can do is you can do something called change formation. In order to change the formation, that is where you change the number of ranks that you have, and it may also change your frontage as well. So in this scenario, again, we have our wood elves. They're 6 wide and they're in 2 ranks. They're 2 ranks deep. And if we wanted to, we could move them. It's for half of their movement. So these guys have 5. So for basically 2.5 inches of movement, I could take the models and move them into one single rank. And then they can move as normal as well. As opposed to that, if the models were like this, they could reduce their frontage if they wanted to, and they could go into 3 ranks. So in this case, like that, and like this, and now they're 3 ranks, and again it would be the same penalty. They'd have 2.5 inches remaining. They've surrendered half of their move. To change 2 ranks, and you wouldn't be able to move it at all, but you technically, if you're in 3 ranks here, for example, and you wanted to go to 1 rank, you wouldn't move at all, and you would just go to 1 rank. So hopefully that explains the change formation. The next thing that's possible is marching. And unfortunately, I've got my skeletons kind of all over the place in their direction, but I'll just go like this here so that we can assume that this is here is the front of the skeleton army. When you march, basically you're moving faster than normal to try to get to bear in on the enemy. When you march, you can move up to double your movement rate. You may, however, not change formation during a march move, and so that means you may not turn. Okay, you are allowed, however, to do one wheel at any point during the march, and a unit that marches can't shoot missile weapons during the shooting phase. War engines and chariots and other machines cannot march because they're a little bit too heavy and cumbersome. Now, a very important aspect of marching is if you ever begin the turn marching and you find that as soon as you find yourself within 8 inches of the enemy troops, you halt and you have to prepare your weapons for combat. So if the troops were here, try to recenter this a little bit, like that. All right. So let's say they began their march, okay, and they wanted to move 4 inches, okay, but so they're going to try to move 8 inches. Now, I'm using kind of a silly example. Undead cannot march, but we're just going to assume they're not subject to that rule. So they can move 4 inches normally, and if they could technically march, they could move another 4 inches. However, currently this is the 8-inch mark right here. So in this case, they'd only be able to move, if they were marching, they would have to stop right here. Because as soon as they're within 8 inches away, so in this case, they'd be better off just to do a regular move and then get a little bit closer. It depends though, you may want to be careful to make sure that you're out of charging distance of your enemy. It's important to note in Warhammer 4th edition, there's no pre-measuring under any circumstance. So it's always kind of you're guessing the ranges and avoiding measuring until the last possible second, just to avoid gamemanship. The next type of special movement that you may do is known as snaking. A unit snakes when it's in a single line formation. And in this case, you basically have freedom of movement to move and turn kind of at your whim. So for example, if I wanted to thread through here, I might go 2 inches like this. We'll assume this is not the forest, so it's not reducing. And then I may want to turn and then move another 2 inches like that. I kind of want to cut across this tree, maybe to get into grips with the foes over here. So basically you can move the path, and then after you're done your movement, you just kind of line them up in the path that they're in. It's not a very practical formation. I don't see it used very often. Sometimes in a scenario you may snake because you're on a trail or a path, but it's generally used more in a skirmish game, or it was used a little bit in 3rd edition as well, but we find that generally in 4th and 5th edition you don't snake that often. But that's how you do it. You're not bound by you don't have to worry about turning. You can turn the model freely, and then you just move a certain distance, and then turn and then move a certain distance, and that's how you snake. Now the rulebook does go into a little bit more about charging. Again, we've kind of covered that, but again, it's important to note when you're charging enemy, you declare your charges, then you do other things, and then before you actually move that unit, make sure that the unit being charged has declared their reactions, and resolve those reactions before charging. There is one other thing of fast cavalry. In this game in 4th edition, fast lightly armored cavalry can maneuver more easily than normal troops. Mounted models with a saving throw of no greater than 5+ and a movement rate of at least 6 inches over open ground is classed as fast cavalry. And what that means is that they can make any number of turns without penalty and may change formation once during their movement by any number of ranks. So you could have, for example, all right, so here we have some undead skeleton, mounted skeleton warriors, and their base movement is 8 inches. In this case, they do not have barding and they don't have heavy armor. They only have a shield, so their movement rate is still 8 inches. So for example, if this fast cavalry wanted to, they could, for example, they can even they get all their benefits even while marching. So let's say they want to march and there's no enemy kind of within 8 inches at all here. So if that's the case here, this fast cavalry could move 6 inches. Again, if their movement's 8, they could go up to 16. They could go 6 inches. They could then turn like this here. So just to speed things up, we might go like that. They could turn, and you kind of center, if you turn, you try to center the unit as best as possible. They move 6 inches so far. They could go another 3 inches like this. They could then do maybe a 2-inch wheel like that. So I think we move 6 plus 3 is 9, 10, 11. They could now go into single file like this. And then they could come in on a charge and move further up to their full distance. So they're allowed to, again, just to recap, they have to have no greater than a 5+ save. They have to have a movement rate of 6 inches and be mounted, and that's over open ground. And they can make any number of turns without penalty, can change formation once during their movement by any number of ranks. So they turned here, they changed formations from 2 ranks to a single rank, and they did that even while marching. So that's how fast cavalry work. They're very efficient in their movement. There is another scenario I wanted to go through, and this is something that players often mess up. Let's say these dwarf crossbowmen were in combat with with this unit of skeleton horsemen, and during the combat, for some reason, they managed to, or they ran away. And let's say the skeleton horsemen didn't catch them, and let's say it was the dwarves' turn. It's now the undead turn, and they're now going to declare a charge against the dwarf crossbowmen that are already fleeing. What you would do in this scenario is the dwarf crossbowmen are going to flee again, and when you flee, you always would roll your 2d6 and flee that many inches, or 3d6 if you were mounted with a 6-inch movement, no save greater than 5+. So these guys might flee. Dwarves have a special rule where they flee 2d6 -1. So let's say they roll an average of 7. They're going to flee 6 more inches. So you work out the results of the flee first, and now you check to see if these chargers are still in range. And if they are, then they're actually going to catch the unit. And in this case, these guys have an 8-inch move. They can charge up to 16. So they would go their 16 inches. They actually go the full distance of the 16. And we'll get more into this in the combat phase. But the last thing I would like to go through today is a little bit about flyers. We're not going to go into individual characters and how they move. We'll cover that in a later section. But when it comes to flyers have a movement stat as normal. However, if they choose to fly during their turn, they can always move 24 inches. And they're not bound by turning or maneuvers. They basically can go basically they pick up and they can land wherever they want within their range of 24 inches. Now, if a flying unit, it's always assumed that they fly for a little bit and they land. I know that's maybe not the most realistic thing, but that's how it's represented in 4th edition. If you charge with a flying unit, you always charge to the front unless that unit's already occupied. If they're occupied, then you have free rein to charge them. Now, we always did a house rule that you'd have to go to the flank first. However, the rules do say if the front is occupied, you can charge them in any direction. So here we would charge them, for example, into their rear. If the unit flees when they charge, now this was covered in a White Dwarf issue later on in a kind of a FAQ. Now, what the rulebook states, what we've always thought was the right way to handle this is, let's say this unit wants to fly and it's way over here, and it wanted to fly and hit this unit. If they flee and they run away, It was stated in the fact that that the flyer would only land at where the units started their turn at. I never really thought that was a good way to handle it. I believe we've always house ruled it our own way so that, if they didn't flee out of the 24 inches, they were caught. But I can see it both ways, and perhaps it does make more sense to land the flyer, at where the units started from, not where they fled to. A model can also do something called go and fly high. Basically, you'll remove it from the battlefield, and at the start of its next phase, it can dive down anywhere onto the battlefield. Two models that are flying high can do aerial combat as well. And there's some other rules for wizards that are flying high, and there was also rules for bows. I don't think you could shoot. You could shoot another model that was flying high, but you couldn't shoot to the ground unless you had a special. I believe there was a special magic item that let you do that. And hopefully that covers a movement. I'm sure it's one of the most critical parts of Warhammer, and I truly hope that this helps you in your journey to playing good games of Warhammer. If you have questions, do leave them in the comments, and I'll try to respond as best I can to my knowledge of the rules. And again, this is Celtic Griffon. Thank you so much for watching the Warhammer tutorial episodes for 4th edition. Take care.